Welcome to Romans chapter 4. Thank you, Winston.
Romans chapter 4. So we've got the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Rome. He's currently in Corinth on his third missionary trip. Now, the church in Rome is made up of two groups. What are those two groups?
Jews and Gentiles.
Yes, good job, Winston. The Jews and the Gentiles. Now, both of these groups of people come from different backgrounds, different practices, different beliefs up until this point, different rituals. So, as you can imagine, there's a little bit of a disconnect because one kind of thinks their way is right, and as does the other. Paul is addressing the thing that matters, the thing that binds us, the thing that brings us together now, since we all recognize Jesus as the Messiah, is faith. Faith is what, Julius?
Believing in something you cannot see.
Yes, believing in something you cannot see. And to illustrate this, Paul references Abraham. Abraham from the book of Genesis. Abraham was known as the patriarch of the Israelites. Abraham has got an incredible story. Abraham is 75 years old when God comes and speaks to him and gives him a promise. Abraham has a wife by the name of Sarah, who's 10 years younger. She's 65. God makes a promise that Abraham, I will deliver you to the promised land, and I will bless and live amongst you and your family. Now, Abraham is sitting there going, I'm 75, my wife is 65, I have no children. And what does God say? Julius, will you flip to Genesis chapter 15 and read me verse 5?
Sure. It says, he took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be.
Abraham, 75 years old, and God is telling him, look at the stars and count them. As many stars as you count is as many descendants as I will bless you with. Don't you think Abraham's going, what? That's crazy. I don't even have a child. My wife Sarah has never been able to bear children. But does Abraham have faith?
Yep. Yes. Yep.
Yes, an immense amount of faith. Do you know how long it took God to fulfill that promise? 25 years. Abraham was 100. His wife Sarah was 90 when she conceived their first child, Isaac. Do you know, think about today. We oftentimes become impatient because we pray to God for something and we expect it to happen right now. Abraham was faithful, was obedient, trusted God for 25 years on something that seemed wild and almost impossible. But Abraham knew something, that all things are possible through God. He remained faithful. At the age of 100, Abraham and Sarah are blessed with their first child, Isaac. Now, they've got this incredible blessing. And what does God ask him? God puts him through a test and says, go sacrifice your only son. You have got Abraham, born in Mesopotamia, now blessed with his first child at the age of 100. And God is testing him and asking him to go sacrifice his only son that he waited 100 years to be blessed with in Moriah. He goes up to Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah, you guys remember in our study, what is Mount Moriah known as modern day?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. So, Abraham takes his little boy that he loves dearly and he ascends Mount Moriah. He lifts the knife and he's ready to sacrifice his only son because he trusts God. Yes.
And an angel says, stop. There is a ram right there.
Says, stop. Do not lay a hand on that boy. And all of a sudden, Abraham turns and a ram is tangled up in the thicket, in the bushes. God provides. God tested Abraham's faith and his obedience. Abraham passed the test, and God provides a ram in which Abraham sacrifices. Do you know what? 2,000 years later, who ends up sacrificing their only begotten son on behalf of all of us? God sacrifices Jesus 2,000 years later. That is the amazing part about this Bible. As we read the New Testament, it's fulfilling prophecy from the Old Testament through Jesus Christ. We are to have the same faith, the same obedience, the same trust in God that Abraham had all of those years ago. That's why God blessed him. Abraham ends up having, Sarah passes away years later, Abraham remarries and has 6 more children. All of those descendants from his 7 children end up being the descendants that number the stars in the sky. God fulfills every one of his promises to Abraham because Abraham remained faithful and obedient. May we all apply that to our lives and be inspired and reminded of how Abraham lived his life. 25 years for God to fulfill a promise, and Abraham's faith never wavered once. Next week, Romans chapter 5.